Ready for a deep dive into something a little unexpected?
Mm.
Today we're going beyond the typical images of ancient Greece and Rome to explore something a bit more controversial, a
Yeah.
bit more taboo, drugs.
Right.
And I'm not talking about ancient aspirin here.
What's so captivating about this topic is how these substances, from mind-altering plants to poisons used for both healing and harm, were just woven into every aspect of their lives.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a time when these potent substances weren't shrouded in stigma, but it's true. So to understand their relationship with drugs, we first need to kind of grasp the reality of their daily lives, which was a far cry from our modern
Oh,
experience.
absolutely.
Right.
Life expectancy was drastically lower than it is today, often reaching only into the 30s or 40s.
Wow, that's pretty sobering. It's easy to romanticize the past,
Yeah.
but facing that kind of reality puts things into perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were constantly battling disease, famine, and even the threat of venomous creatures.
Speaking of disease, I was struck by the accounts of tuberculosis and typhus. Those descriptions in Thucydides' writings are pretty graphic.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of suffering they endured. And even beyond disease, they faced constant threats from their environment.
Right, like the massive fires Pliny the Elder documented in Rome.
Oh, right?
Those must have been terrifying. And then there's the constant threat of famine due to crop failures, not to mention venomous snakes, scorpions, and rabid dogs. It's like an entirely different world.
It certainly was.
Yeah.
And it's against this backdrop of hardship that we can begin to understand their reliance on drugs.
Makes sense that they would turn to anything that offered relief or a way to cope with that.
Exactly.
I'm curious, how did their approach to medicine differ from ours?
Well, ancient medicine relied heavily on what nature provided. Plants, minerals, animal products, and their healing practices were built on three pillars:
Okay.
diet, surgery, and of course drugs.
So they were basically pharmacists of the natural world. Did they have any idea how these substances worked, or was it mostly trial and error?
It was likely a combination of both. While they lacked our modern understanding of biochemistry, they possessed a surprisingly sophisticated knowledge of the effects of various substances. Take, for instance, Celsus's recipe for a wound plaster.
What's so special about a wound plaster?
Well, it contained ingredients like frankincense and litharge, both of which have antiseptic properties.
Oh, good.
This shows a clear understanding of infection control, even without knowing about bacteria.
That's really impressive. It challenges our assumptions about the sophistication of ancient medicine.
Exactly. And it gets even more intriguing. Soranus, a gynecologist, developed a vaginal suppository for contraception using ingredients like pomegranate rind and acacia.
Wait, plant-based contraception.
Yeah?
That's incredible. I wonder how effective it actually was.
That's still debated among scholars, but the fact that they were experimenting with such methods is fascinating.
Yeah, it speaks to their willingness to explore the potential of plants for all sorts of purposes.
Right.
Were there any other unusual remedies they used?
Oh, absolutely. One particularly surprising example is castoreum.
Castoreum. That name doesn't exactly ring a bell.
Well, prepare yourself. It's a secretion from beaver glands.
Wow, okay, that's unexpected. What did they use that for?
The Romans used it for pain relief, and some even theorize that it played a role in the eventual discovery of aspirin.
I can't help but wonder what those ancient doctors would think of our modern pharmaceuticals. But it's clear that they were onto something with their knowledge of plants. What's interesting is that their use of drugs went beyond just treating physical ailments, right?
You're right, they didn't draw the same clear distinctions between medicine, recreation, and magic that we do today.
So the same substance could be a cure, a recreational drug, and a magical ingredient all at once? That's a pretty different perspective.
Precisely. Substances like opium, wormwood, henbane, even hemlock all had multiple uses ranging from medicinal to mind-altering.
It's like stepping into a pharmacy where the line between healing and a psychedelic experience is blurred.
A good example is Cato the Elder, who strongly advocated for poppy cultivation. While he likely focused on its medicinal benefits, it's hard to ignore its potential for other applications.
Especially since poppies are the source of opium. It makes you wonder if he was aware of those effects.
And then there's wormwood. Even Ovid, who famously complained about its smell, acknowledged its widespread use.
If even the poets are writing about it, it must have been quite popular.
Lucretius even described how to give wormwood to children, which, let's be honest, raises some eyebrows today.
It definitely suggests that its mind-altering effects were well known.
Yeah.
Speaking of potent substances, what about henbane?
Henbane was considered incredibly powerful. Pliny the Elder even warned about its ability to cause permanent insanity. It gives you a sense of the risks associated with some of these ancient remedies.
It makes you wonder how they navigated that fine line between beneficial and dangerous.
And it begs the question, how would the ancient Greeks and Romans view our modern war on drugs? It's hard to imagine them criminalizing substances they viewed as gifts from nature and tools for exploring consciousness.
That's a really interesting point. Their worldview was so different from ours. But what's even more fascinating is that this acceptance of drugs extended to their mythology, right?
Absolutely. This is where we delve into the world of narco-mythology.
So it's not just about using drugs, it's about integrating them into their stories and beliefs. What exactly is narco-mythology?
Think of it as myths that explain the origin or use of drugs, often with deeper symbolism woven in. For example, consider ambrosia, often described as the food of the gods.
Right, like a divine feast.
Some scholars believe it might represent a real psychoactive substance, a kind of divine elixir that bestowed immortality or otherworldly powers.
That's intriguing. It makes those myths even more layered and mysterious.
And then there's the myth of Prometheus, who famously stole fire from the gods. But what's often overlooked is that he also brought humanity another gift: opium.
Wait, Prometheus brought opium to humans. How is that connected to the myth?
According to the myth, his blood transformed into the poppy plant, symbolizing pain relief and sacrifice.
Oh, wow.
It links this potent drug to a figure who defied the gods for the sake of humankind.
So it's not just a story about fire, it's about bringing a powerful tool for coping with pain and suffering.
Exactly. And this connection between drugs and powerful figures extends to other myths as well. Take, for instance, the Eleusinian Mysteries.
I've heard of those, but I don't know much about them.
They were secret rituals involving a mind-altering potion said to allow participants to experience the divine plan. The secrecy surrounding them only adds to the mystique.
It's like an ancient state-sanctioned psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
What exactly did they experience? What did they see?
Unfortunately, the details of the rituals were closely guarded, so we can only speculate. However, it's clear that they saw drugs as a pathway to deeper spiritual insight.
It's mind-blowing to think about a society where altered states of consciousness were not only accepted, but seemingly encouraged in a religious context.
It really is.
Yeah.
These myths offer a fascinating glimpse into their beliefs about the power of drugs and their connection to the divine. They make you wonder if there's hidden knowledge encoded within these stories waiting to be unlocked.
This is all so intriguing. So we've got the gods and myths, but what about real people using drugs for magic and ritual? Was that common practice?
Absolutely. Think sorcerers, witches, and potion-wielding experts. And while there were differences between Eastern and Western practitioners, both incorporated drugs into their rituals.
And I bet the sources are full of evidence.
Oh, definitely. Take Samatha's love spell in Theocritus's poetry. She uses potent ingredients like bay leaves in a fumigation ritual, hoping to enchant her lover.
So an ancient version of a love potion.
Exactly. And then there are the Greek magical papyri, a collection of spells, incantations, and recipes.
Are those like ancient spell books?
In a way, yes. They offer a fascinating blend of what sounds like ancient medicine and something far more mystical. What's intriguing is that they often use code words to disguise ingredients. Blood of Hephaestus was actually wormwood, and semen of Helios was white hellebore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's like a secret language designed to protect their knowledge.
precisely. It offers a glimpse into the secretive world of ancient magic and the role drugs played in it. Some spells use drugs for what we might now call spiritual goals. For instance, one incantation using laurel berries and nightshade was meant to seek wisdom from Apollo. It suggests that they saw drugs as a way to tap into divine knowledge and insight.
So it wasn't just about love spells or curses. It was about using drugs to connect with the divine or enhance their spiritual practice. That's pretty profound.
And there's perhaps no better example of this than Medea, the infamous sorceress from Greek mythology.
Oh, Medea.
Yeah.
Known for her vengeful acts. But could her powers have been rooted more in her knowledge of drugs than actual supernatural abilities?
That's a fascinating question. Remember her use of the drug of Prometheus to make Jason invulnerable? While often translated as charm, the original Greek word is pharmakon, meaning drug.
Right. It highlights the practical botanical basis of her power.
She wasn't just casting spells, she was using her deep knowledge of plants to achieve extraordinary effects.
It's like she was a master chemist, brewing up concoctions that could heal harm and even transform the very nature of reality.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we consider magic might simply be an advanced understanding of the natural world.
That's a mind-blowing thought. What if what we call supernatural is just natural phenomena that we haven't fully grasped yet?
It's a possibility worth considering. But even with all this knowledge, Medea's story isn't just about the power of plants, it's also about the darker side of human nature. Her decision to kill her own children, even as an act of revenge, is a stark reminder of the potential for darkness that resides within us all. And it's interesting how she turns to drugs, in this case, poison, as both a weapon and a potential escape from her suffering.
It's a tragic reminder that even substances with healing properties can be misused, and that the line between remedy and poison can be dangerously thin.
Medea's story is a complex tapestry of power knowledge and the human capacity for both great love and profound cruelty. It's a story that continues to resonate with us today precisely because it speaks to the timeless struggles we face as human beings.
It reminds us that knowledge is a double-edged sword, and that even the most potent substances can be used for both good and evil.
Exactly.
This deep dive is truly making me rethink everything I thought I knew about ancient Greece and Rome. It's like we're peeling back the layers of history to reveal a hidden world of knowledge, ritual, and altered states of consciousness.
And it's a world that has a lot to teach us about ourselves, about the enduring power of plants, and about the complex relationship between human nature knowledge and the pursuit of both pleasure and power.
This is all so much to take in. Let's take a moment to process everything we've learned so far.
Before we paused, we were discussing how Medea's story, despite its tragic elements, also reveals a deep understanding of the natural world and the power of plants.
Right, and it made me think about how our concept of magic might just be advanced knowledge that we've lost or misinterpreted over time.
Yeah.
But I want to shift gears a bit and talk more about that connection between drug use and democracy in ancient Athens.
It is fascinating, isn't it, to think that a society so focused on reason and logic also had this openness to altered states of consciousness. And the comparison with Sparta really highlights this contrast.
You have Athens, this bustling democracy where individual liberty and free speech are paramount, and they seemingly extended that freedom to what they put into their bodies.
Mm.
And then you have Sparta, a highly structured militaristic society with a much more restrictive view of personal behavior.
The Spartans viewed both free speech and drug use as potential threats to their rigid social order. They believed in maintaining control and conformity, while the Athenians were more tolerant of individual expression, even when it came to experimenting with substances that altered perception.
It's almost like they represent two opposing philosophies on human nature. Athens embraces the unpredictable, perhaps even chaotic aspects of human experience, while Sparta seeks to suppress anything that might disrupt the status quo.
That's a really insightful observation. And it's reflected in their attitudes towards drugs. Athens saw them as tools for healing, for exploring consciousness, for connecting with the divine head. Sparta, on the other hand, likely saw them as potential sources of disorder and instability.
It makes you wonder how those different perspectives influenced their cultures as a whole. Did Athenian openness to new ideas and experiences contribute to their flourishing arts and philosophy?
It's a compelling question. And it's worth noting that this Athenian tolerance wasn't just limited to personal use. The Eleusinian mysteries, with their use of a mind-altering potion, were a state-sanctioned event.
It's incredible to think that a society so steeped in rationality also embraced these ritualistic experiences that defied logical explanation. What does that tell us about their worldview?
Perhaps it suggests that they recognized the limitations of reason alone, that there were aspects of human experience that couldn't be fully grasped through logic and analysis.
It challenges our modern tendency to categorize everything as either scientific or superstitious. Maybe they had a more holistic understanding where these seemingly opposing forces could coexist.
It's certainly possible, and it makes you wonder if our current approach to drug use, which often demonizes and criminalizes these substances, is actually hindering our understanding of human consciousness and potential.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Yeah.
But let's not forget that the Athenians weren't completely naive about the potential risks of drug use. They had physicians who emphasized responsible use and were aware of the dangers of excessive consumption.
Right. It wasn't just a free-for-all. They recognized that these powerful substances, while offering incredible benefits, could also be harmful if misused.
So maybe there's a middle ground between our modern war on drugs mentality and the complete lack of regulation that some people advocate for. Maybe the Athenians, with their balanced approach, offer a model worth considering.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but exploring these historical perspectives can certainly challenge our assumptions and encourage us to think more critically about our own policies.
It's amazing how this deep dive into ancient drug use is raising all sorts of questions about modern society. But before we get too lost in those contemporary debates, I want to circle back to the role of drugs in their literature and storytelling.
We talked about narco-mythology earlier, but it's worth delving deeper into how these substances permeated their artistic expressions. It's not just about gods and myths, it's about real people grappling with the effects of these potent plants.
It's almost as if their literature serves as a reflection of their lived experiences with drugs, a way to process and understand these altered states of consciousness.
Exactly. And remember, they didn't have the same stigma surrounding drug use that we do today. They saw it as a natural part of life, a way to connect with the divine, explore the depths of their own minds, and even find solace in the face of suffering.
So how did this play out in their stories? Can you give us some specific examples?
We'll consider the myth of the Cyclops Polyphemus from Homer's Odyssey. Remember how Odysseus gets him drunk on strong wine before blinding him?
Of course. It's a classic tale of cunning and trickery.
But it also highlights their understanding of how alcohol could be used strategically to alter the course of events to gain an advantage over an enemy. This theme of using drugs for practical purposes pops up repeatedly in their stories.
It's not just about getting intoxicated. It's about harnessing the power of these substances to achieve specific goals.
And then there's the myth of Circe, the sorceress, who transforms Odysseus's men into pigs using her magical potions. It's a cautionary tale about the transformative power of certain substances, but it also acknowledges their allure and the danger of succumbing to their influence.
It's like a metaphor for the double-edged sword of drug use, the potential for both profound change and devastating consequences.
The ancient Greeks and Romans were clearly fascinated by this duality, by the idea that certain substances could alter your very being both physically and mentally.
It speaks to their deep curiosity about the nature of consciousness and the boundaries of human experience.
Precisely. And this exploration of altered states wasn't limited to mythology. Even the poets, those masters of language and imagination, may have turned to certain substances for inspiration.
Wait, are you suggesting that the poets were getting high to write their epic poems? I mean, it would make sense, but is there any evidence to support that?
Well, consider this. Theophrastus, a botanist, described how goats became euphoric after eating a particular herb. And guess what word he used to describe their state?
I'm intrigued, tell me.
Philidon. It's the same word Aristophanes used to describe people being drugged in his plays.
So they're using the same terminology to describe the effects of drugs on both animals and humans.
Exactly. It suggests a recognition of the connection between certain substances and altered states of consciousness, regardless of the species. Perhaps those poets weren't solely relying on divine inspiration. Maybe they had a little botanical assistance to get their creative juices flowing.
It's a fascinating possibility and certainly challenges our romantic notions of how these great works of literature came into being. But let's shift our focus back to one of the most intriguing figures we've discussed, Medea.
Ah, yes. The vengeful sorceress whose story embodies this complex interplay between drugs, magic, and the darker aspects of human nature.
We talked earlier about how her powers might have stemmed more from her knowledge of plants than any supernatural abilities. But I'm curious to explore that further.
One of the most striking examples is her use of the drug of Prometheus to make Jason invulnerable. The original Greek word for this charm is pharmakon, which translates directly to drug.
Right. It's a crucial distinction that often gets lost in translation.
It highlights the fact that Medea wasn't casting spells in the traditional sense. She was a master of her craft, a skilled user of botanicals who understood how to harness their power to achieve extraordinary effects.
She was like an ancient chemist, brewing up concoctions that could heal harm or even transform reality itself.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we consider magic in ancient times might simply be a sophisticated understanding of the natural world that we've lost or dismissed as superstition.
It's a thought-provoking idea. What if Medea's knowledge was simply a form of science that we haven't fully rediscovered?
It challenges us to re-examine our assumptions about the past and to consider the possibility that ancient wisdom might hold valuable insights that we've overlooked in our pursuit of modern progress.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of history to reveal a world where the boundaries between science, magic, and religion were blurred, a world where knowledge of the natural world, especially the power of plants, was deeply respected and utilized.
And Medea's story, despite its tragic elements, reminds us that this knowledge is a double-edged sword. It can be used for both good and evil, for healing and harm.
Her decision to kill her own children, even as an act of revenge, is a stark reminder of the human capacity for darkness. And her use of poison in that act further underscores the potential for misuse inherent in even the most potent substances.
It's a tale that resonates with us today because it speaks to our own struggles with power knowledge and the complexities of human nature.
It's a reminder that even as we explore the fascinating world of ancient drug use and its impact on their culture, we must also grapple with the ethical dilemmas inherent in wielding such powerful knowledge.
It's a conversation that needs to continue as we delve deeper into this topic.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's incredible how just exploring the ancient world's relationship with drugs reveals so much about their culture, their beliefs, even their understanding of human nature.
Yeah, it's a perspective that challenges our modern assumptions and kind of forces us to confront the complex history of these substances.
One of the most striking takeaways for me has been the connection between drug use and democracy in ancient Athens. It's
Mm.
mind-boggling to think about a society that valued reason and logic, also embracing altered states of consciousness.
And it becomes even more intriguing when we contrast Athens with Sparta. On one hand, you have a society that championed individual liberty, free speech, and seemingly extended that freedom to their choice of substances. On the other hand, you have a highly militaristic, authoritarian state that viewed both free speech and drug use as threats to its order.
It's like they represent two completely different approaches to human nature and governance. Athens embraced the unpredictable, the ecstatic, the potential for chaos inherent in human experience.
Right.
Sparta, in contrast, sought to control and suppress anything that might challenge its rigid structure.
And their attitudes toward drugs perfectly reflect this difference. Athens saw them as tools for healing, for exploring consciousness, for connecting with the divine. Sparta, one can imagine, viewed them as potential sources of disorder and subversion.
It raises the question, did Athenian openness to new ideas and experiences, even those induced by drugs, contribute to their cultural flourishing? Did their tolerance for altered states of consciousness foster a more creative and intellectually vibrant society?
It's a question worth pondering. And it's not just about individual use. Remember, the Eleusinian mysteries with their mind-altering potion were state-sanctioned. This wasn't some fringe group. It was woven into the fabric of their society.
It challenges our modern tendency to compartmentalize, to see things as either scientific or superstitious. The Athenians seem to have a more holistic understanding where reason and ecstatic experience could coexist.
It makes you wonder if our current approach to drugs, with its emphasis on prohibition and criminalization, is actually limiting our understanding of human potential and consciousness.
It's certainly a perspective worth considering. But even with their more permissive approach, it's important to acknowledge that the Athenians weren't naive about the potential risks of drug use.
Absolutely. Physicians had a code of ethics that emphasized responsible use, and there was awareness of the dangers of excessive consumption.
So it wasn't a free-for-all. They recognized that these substances, while offering profound benefits, could also be harmful if misused.
Precisely. And perhaps this more balanced approach, which acknowledged both the potential and the peril, offers a more nuanced model than our current system that often swings between extremes of prohibition and permissiveness.
This deep dive has really challenged my own assumptions about drug use, both ancient and modern. It's clear that these substances have a long and complicated history, intertwined with religion, medicine, and even politics.
And exploring that history can offer valuable insights into our own relationship with these substances, prompting us to question our policies, our prejudices, and our understanding of human nature itself.
It's a reminder that the past is never truly past, that the echoes of ancient wisdom can still resonate in our modern world.
And perhaps by listening to those echoes, we can find a path toward a more balanced and informed approach to these powerful substances.
So for all our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep exploring the fascinating world of ancient drug use. You might be surprised at what you discover not only about the past, but about yourselves and the society we live in today.
Until next time, may your deep dives be filled with wonder and revelation.